You know, you had those cyanotypes. Am I saying it right?
Cyanotypes.
Cyanotypes of 19th century, and they're blueprint photos. So, and then I'm just going to give their spoken word names, but you can give the. Then the narrators of the poem, Poet Gold and Brathmatic. Did I say that right? I mean, they have real. You can say their real names, but it was easier for me just to take. And then the music by Tony Jefferson. How did that idea come from? Because also, you know, in Mary Lou, you know, still photography, which is kind of going to be a theme in this show. Really, even though it's still, it creates the movement for a motion picture. So, and then they have the blue, then the black and white, and then video from way back, you know, those old time cams.
Right.
How'd that all come about, and where'd you find all that?
Right. So, Blueprint for My People is a visual poem that explores the African American experience through
really
cyanotypes.
Yeah.
So the cyanotypes, which are blueprints, and they are blue photographs.
In blue hue and
Right.
different. Yeah.
And they're archival, and they're rare, and they're basically cyanotypes of African Americans in the late 1800s, early 1900s in rural settings. So I think the actual photographs were taken around the Virginia, Hampton University area.
Can I ask you who you think took those?
Well, I know who did.
Oh, okay.
There are 3 collections that I basically found the majority of the cyanotypes, and I found hundreds, you know, so not all of them ended up in the film. But one photographer was Frances Benjamin Johnston, who is a woman, and she photographed some of the images around Tuskegee Institute at the time, which is now Tuskegee University, which is in Alabama. And then there were 2 male, and these are Caucasian, and I believe Lee Minor and Richard Riley, and they were filming around the, or shot around the Hampton University, Virginia area. And so those are the photographers of Blueprint for My People who actually took the cyanotypes back in the day.
Do you think they did it because of an interest, or do you think they were documenting something for an organization or trying to?
Right. So they were working with the historical Black colleges and universities. So Lee Minor and Richard Riley were working with Hampton. Frances Benjamin Johnson was working with Tuskegee. And all, I would say, within the premise of documenting rural African Americans around these institutions and capturing them in candid, unstereotypical, you know, just moments on their farms, going to work, doing their labor, what have you, you know? And the fact that they were blue, and they're blue because back in those times, in the early 1900s, the cyanotypes were sort of like the intermediary. They were the proofs. So it was a cheap way of looking at what you shot, and then they would decide out of the ones that they wanted to really, you know, exhibit, those were the ones that would become black and white glass negatives.
Okay.
So the cyanotypes were cheap to do, and they were an intermediary process.
But they're incredibly beautiful, and like Wedgwood blue and all these different blue. It's like,
They're
well, not Wedgwood, but you know, just different levels of blue. And
they're almost otherworldly, and
I know they tell like a deeper story in a lot of ways.
Well, I've seen a lot of images, and this is in my film. You know, I've been hired as an archival researcher and an archival producer in other films. So I've seen a lot of images of African Americans, and I've never seen these blue prints. So that's captivated me from the beginning.
Now, how did you find out about them? Did you just fall upon them, and then you go, there's some story here, and then were you always fond of the poem too, or how did it all?
So how it came about is that in my last job as an independent filmmaker working for a production company, that was working for, basically I was hired to work as an archival producer for Firelight Media on the film Tell Them We Are Rising, the story of historical black colleges and universities on PBS.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was the archival producer. And in finding, and the task was to find images of African Americans through the time span of, you know, from the Civil War, basically, to the present day. So it's 200 years of history.
That's a lot of photos.
A lot of photos. And so in just doing that job, I came upon these collections of cyanotypes, which I had never seen before, anything like that. And I spoke to the director, Stanley Nelson, and Marco Williams. I said, look at these incredible, you know, photographs. They're blue. How exciting. And, you know, they're like, yeah, they're beautiful, but we can't use them, you know, in our film. It doesn't make sense. Why would they be blue? And so, great, because I knew at that point I was going to work with these images. So this was back in 2016. And I also knew, because I was wanting to tell a story in a sort of more lyrical, cinematic way, that I would have to edit it. And I didn't know how to edit non-linear. You know, I learned how to edit film when I went to film school. I learned linear videotape editing, which is a whole other thing back in the 90s. But yeah, I just didn't stay with editing because I was producing and directing. I went onto that track. So I learned Adobe Premiere and started working whatever was in my head to tell this story, you know, and luckily had these incredible old film clips and new clips, and I knew I wanted poetry. And it wasn't until I came across Margaret Walker's poem, For My People, that I said, oh, this is the poem to tell this story, you know, visually with these incredible images. And knowing that I wanted to have spoken word artists.
And they both have such amazing voices too.
Amazing.
And they make words just, I don't know, spin and soar, and really, very powerful.
Very powerful, very dynamic. And so that was, you know, that's how I learned of Poet Gold, and she basically brought Brathmatic with her, and because I knew I wanted a man and a woman, because we're telling the story of a people. Tony Jefferson, the composer, is actually a neighbor and friend of mine, and he's an incredible jazz artist. He's played internationally with everyone. And then I had the graphic designer, Ayana Amabe, who you know, just did some of the text work. So I was just really on my way to telling this story. It was a lot of fun.
It's beautiful. So
Thank
I hope
you.
people get to see it or go